Good afternoon. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. I've been working at the Erasmus University for 10 years. I was the director of the Institute for Transitions here. And from that institute, my current organization, Agenda, started. Because at the Institute of Transitions, we found out how can you make the world more sustainable by using transition theory. But after 6 years and having a pile of PhD students that wrote books, I was like, nice, all those books, but 10 people read them, and how do we change in real life? So that's why I founded Agenda and started to work on the transition by concrete actions. So most of our work, 90%, is on solutions. And I'm going to talk today about urgency in our court case, which is a small part of our work. So I usually don't like to be called an activist, because I've worked for a very long time at universities and I do it very science-based. But we do need to move a lot quicker. And that's the reason why Agenda exists. You just already talked about our Prime Minister. That's him on the bike eating an apple. And because we won this court case 3 times in a row, I sent him a letter last year and asked him, can I have a meeting with you? Because in the past 10 years, you have always sent me to the Ministry of Economic Affairs or the Ministry of Environment when we still had that. But then I want to talk to you because I think it's your business and climate change is so important that I want to speak to you too. And then I had a meeting with him within 2 weeks. So if you finally invite yourself, you do get this meeting. And I asked him to sit down for 20 minutes, and I first wanted to give him a presentation, a little bit like I'm going to give you, because I thought that he did not know enough about climate change. I heard him saying things like, be calm, we have 30 years. Well, you should not be calm, and we don't have 30 years. So for me, it was important to talk to him personally. And my first question to him was, we have starting to use oil, gas, and coal a long time ago, roughly 270 years. But what percentage of all greenhouse gas emissions do you think have occurred during your life? And he and I are 3 months apart in age, so his figure is my figure. And I asked him, what do you think? How much of all emissions were during your life? And then he started to think like, well, if it would be linear, it would be probably 15%. I don't think that's true. So his best guess was 30%. What do you think? How much of all greenhouse gases were during your life? What percentage? Depends on your age, of course. Don't hear anything. Well, I can tell you, for him and for me, it was almost 80% of all greenhouse gases occurred during our life. And for me, it was important to start my presentation to him with this figure, because I think if we are the generation that created all these emissions, it's also our generation that should do the most to bring it down again. We can't wait until our children have the power, because then it's already too late. And I think we should do quite a lot more than we do currently. That was the reason why in 2012, when he was already Prime Minister, I sent a letter to him and I said, look, you have said within the framework of the Climate Change Convention that industrial countries need to reduce the CO2 emissions between 25 and 40% in 2020. Your goals in the Netherlands and your policies are not focused on those 25 to 40%. So please, choose for 40% because that's what we need to really stay below at that time 2 degrees. And he sent me a letter back, dear Ms. Minnesma, you're absolutely right. Climate change is a very big problem with enormous consequences. The risk is high and the chance that it will happen this century is very high. So we've never had, in all those years that we were in those court fights, we never had a discussion about climate change is a big threat. But he said in this letter, we don't want to be a front runner. Which was really funny, because at that time we were one of the lowest in the world on renewable energy, and therefore also one of the highest on emissions. So, and then say to us, we don't want to do more because we don't want to be a front runner is a bit funny. I would say first go to the middle. But he wrote me this letter, and then we had a discussion, and he said, no, I don't want to do 25 to 40%, and then you can go to court, because you first have to try to do it in a nice way. And in court, of course, the lawyer on behalf of the Dutch government said, well, please, judges, don't do anything because we are only a very small country and we can't change climate change, so you can't say anything to us. And a lot of people think because we're a small country that we are also a small emitter, but we are amongst the 20% countries with the highest absolute emissions. So that was also what the judge said. If you are small and you don't have to do anything, then 80% of the countries can do nothing because they're even smaller. So that's not a good argument, because the first page of the Climate Change Convention says nobody can do it alone. Everybody should take its fair part, and what this fair part is discussed within the framework of the Climate Change Convention. And there, all those countries had said, industrial countries need to do between 25 and 40%. And our government had signed this in numerous documents. So that was the reason why we asked for the 25 to 30%. But of course, this is not very fair, because this shows the absolute emissions. And you see China is a very big emitter, America as well, and the Netherlands is a very big emitter too. But of course, China is a much bigger emitter, because they have more than 1 billion people. We only have 17.5 million. So it's much more fair to look at the emissions per person. And then we are in the top 10. We emit 5 times as much as people in India. So of course, in the last climate change meeting we had in Glasgow last year, the people from India said, yeah, if we all are going to diminish the emissions with 50%, then the Netherlands still does 5 times as much in 2030. It's not very fair that we all do the same. The big countries that have emitted the most the past 100 years should do more than the countries that have hardly emitted at all, if you look at the total. So for me, it means that I can't go all over the world and say you should do more if we are amongst the biggest emitters in the world and in the top 10 per capita emissions. We should first do our job ourselves before we can ask something from other countries. And it's extremely important for us, because 1/3 of the Netherlands is below sea level. So we need all those other countries together to bring those emissions down. So we went to the court case, and the basic thing is that we had to present to the courts that climate change is something very dangerous already for the people who live at the moment, and that governments have a duty of care to protect their citizens, which for me is very logical, but you have to show this based on all the documents, based on the Climate Change Convention and so on. And then we said, well, if the government is not doing enough, so if you do nothing, then you have a breach of the law. And the first court we said this is a so-called unlawful deed, and in the next court we said it's also a breach of human rights law. And all the 3 courts said this is true, it's both an unlawful deed and it is a breach of human rights. So we demand actually first 40% and said, well, if you don't want to give us 40%, then at least 25%. And the courts all said, actually, the 40% is necessary, but that's up to politics. But the lowest level, that's what we as a court guard. And so the Dutch government should do at least the 25%. And if you look at danger, I would say look around the world. It's everywhere. The high temperatures at the moment in Pakistan and India, the flooding and the mudslides that are happening in other parts of the world, the fires in America, it's everywhere. And it's now only 1.1, 1.2 degrees warmer than in 1850. You can imagine what it will be if it's 1.5 or 2 degrees warmer. You really don't want that. So in the past 100 years, we have emitted, and because of the higher concentration of CO2, the temperatures went up. And then we are in the Netherlands had to explain to the judges why is it so dangerous for the Netherlands that those temperatures go up. Well, so we showed, well, more than 90% of all the heat was taken up by the oceans. And so we should be very happy with the oceans, because if they weren't there, it would already be much, much warmer. They also took more than 1/3 of all the CO2, so it's more acidic, therefore. And both the heat and the acidicity, no, the English word, that's always difficult. A more acid ocean and a warmer ocean is not very good for coral reefs. It's not very good for all kinds of animals that are in the beginning of the whole stream of life. And therefore, is also based on biodiversity not a very good idea. But for the Netherlands, it's also very bad because the thermal expansion of the ocean, because of the warmer oceans, creates also this sea level rise to a large extent. And the melting of Greenland and particularly Antarctica for the Netherlands is actually more important than Greenland, together create a lot of sea level rise. And if you see this, the land ice in Antarctica goes down quite straight, Greenland goes down quite straight. And so the sea level rise used to be 2.5 millimeters a year. It's now roughly between 4 and 5 already. And we had a committee in the year 2008 that was a former minister and that was asked by our government, how much money do we need to spend on higher dikes? And we plan 100 years in advance. And this committee had a whole scientific committee, and they said, well, this is the situation for the Netherlands, and the worst case scenario this century will be 1 meter 30 sea level rise this century. And the strange thing was that the person that was in our chair of agenda, Professor Vellinga, was one of the members, and he said, I was surprised what happened when we brought out this report, because everybody was falling over us that this 1 meter 30 as the worst case scenario. Of course, you hope the worst case scenario is not the scenario that will happen, but you have to have it. But particularly scientists were very angry at them. They said, this is activistic, this can't be true, and so on and so on. There was a lot of hassle here in the Netherlands about that report. And then it was only 10 years later when a new report came out by one of our main institutes, Deltaris, and there the worst case scenario is already between 2.5 and 3 meters. So within 10 years, it went from 1 meter 30 to 2.5 to 3. And of course, I hope the worst case scenario will not happen, but it must make us think that within 10 years, it moves so quickly. And we are here in Rotterdam, and we have a reasonably good system, which is supposed to be one of the best in the world, which was made to save us from the sea and all kinds of other water effects after a very big disaster we had in the early 50s. And it took us more than 30 years to prepare all the dikes and etc. And actually it was only fully ready after 50 years. But one of the main parts of that is the so-called Maaslandkering, which is here close to Rotterdam. And that is built for 50 centimeter sea level rise. And the whole system is built for between 50 centimeters and 1 meter. Well, that is surely not enough this century. And this picture shows a bit that the gray line says the first big improvement we did could help us for roughly 65 years. But if we now enlarge it a bit, it goes so quickly with the sea level rise that you can use it only for 20 years. Well, if it takes you more than 30 years to build it, that's not enough. So you should already look at the next and the next phase. But how far can you go? And our scientific institutes are now making different scenarios based on the sea level rise studies, and actually very seriously working out these scenarios. One of them is to build islands at the coast to protect us a bit more, but there is also one that says give up, well, almost half of the Netherlands. And the people that I spoke to when we started our court case, the scientists about this topic, 10 years ago told me, you're exaggerating and it won't go so quickly. The same persons now say we should start discussions with Germany, which is our neighboring country, because maybe we can't stay where we are. And that 10 years ago, that was kind of science fiction, and now it's already what scientists write. So we have moved very quickly to other situations, and this is now being worked out. And you can see the one on the right. You can, of course, build dikes like size, but then you have to pump the water, which is asking a lot of energy, but it is also, at a certain point, you can't go any further. And there you have this idea of moving with the water. Well, you've seen this picture of the vice mayor, where he showed that we have an office building floating. Well, should we make half of the Netherlands floating? Well, then you should also give up quite a lot. And a lot of people are not even prepared to think about it, but the scientists are already thinking about it. And it might happen, unfortunately, quicker than we thought. Well, for the 3 different judges that we encountered in the past 10 years, it was clear that climate change is a big problem for the Netherlands, that it's dangerous already this century for the current generations, and that if the Netherlands itself says that the absolute minimum level to do is 25% less emissions in 2020, then that is what we need to do. And we were not on track at all when we won our court case. We first won in 2015, then in 2018, and then late 2019. And if you look at the world, we have this United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change now for 30 years. This year we have a celebration. And every year as a world we went up, 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 up. We don't take it serious at all. And because of our court case, a lot of people in the world were inspired by it, because a lot of people had been fighting climate change and gave up. But after our court case, they had hope again. And now you see hundreds of court cases all over the world. We have a special team, a climate litigation network, and we help a lot of those court cases. And I'm particularly enthusiastic about two of them, which were in France and Germany, because our court case was for 2020, and they moved to 2030. And there were particularly young people that said, if we go on like we are currently doing, then in 2030 the whole so-called carbon budget is gone. Then you have emitted so much that you have emitted for more than this 1.5 degrees warming. And if your carbon budget is gone in 2030, then there is no space to move for the younger generation. So that's a breach of their human rights. And both courts said, yes, that's true. France and Germany have signed the Paris Agreement, which was later than when we started our court case. And there we have said we should stick to 1.5 degrees and not more than that. So those courts said, well, if you take yourself seriously, then you should move much quicker. And in Germany, within a week, Angela Merkel said, okay, we will move our targets from 55% reduction to 65% reduction within a week. That was not what happened in the Netherlands. It took us more than 4 years before finally something started to move. But this, I think, gives a lot of people hope that those different court cases that there are around the world are one of the strategies that will help to move governments and move much quicker. Well, I must say, I've been at the first conference of the party, COP1, when I studied, and I did my study on the Climate Change Convention. And I did not expect that in 2015 there would be another positive outcome. And I was very glad that all countries of the world, almost 200, said 2 degrees warming is actually too much. We should stick to 1.5. And a lot of people don't have a clue what the difference means. That was also what I presented to our Prime Minister, because I said, you have signed for 1.5. Do you know the difference between 1.5 and 2, what that really means for your policy? And he had no clue. And I think scientists have now shown that if you really want to stay below those 1.5 degrees, then the whole world should be in 2033 at 0 emissions if you want to stay below 1.5 degrees with a chance of 66%. And of course, all those countries in Paris in 2015 thought, if we go back home and say we need to stop all emissions in 2033, that's political suicide, so we can't do that. So I explained to our Prime Minister, so do you know why you are say, calm, we have 30 years, you can keep emitting until 2050. Do you know what you then say? And he actually didn't. So I say, well, for me, this is the most important picture. Because if you go on with emitting until 2050, then you have emitted so much that it will be at least 2.5 degrees warmer. And then you say to young people, and that's this yellow field, and then you try to get all the CO2 out of the air again, and then maybe we will be going back to 2 degrees or 1.5. But this yellow field is something that scientists have made, and I know actually the person who did this, and he said, I regret that I did this, because by making those so-called negative emissions, that's what this yellow field is, I gave politicians the room to go on until 2050 and then hope that someone would get the CO2 out of the air again. But if you want to go back from 2.5 degrees warming to 2 degrees, to give an example, you can plant trees and get CO2 out of the air. then you need as a surface all the agricultural land of the whole world, plant it full with trees, make sure they stick there for 30 years, and then only you have half of a degree less. So you need so much surface to bring it down and to get so much CO2 out of the air. There are a few other possibilities, but they're all extremely expensive, and all of them demand extremely large part of the world's land to get CO2 out of the air. And I think you can't do that to the children of this world, because it's almost impossible to go back. So for me, it's extremely important that we don't move slowly and hope that we will be at zero in 2050, but to bring it back as quickly as possible to 2030. So your eye on 2030 is extremely important, but it's not to be halfway or something. No, that's the time where you should be at zero. And I know that that sounds impossible, but I think after COVID and now with the Ukraine, we know what we can do if we really see that something is a crisis. If we really understand what it means, emitting so much and all the consequences, then we can move so much quicker. Because you all know the technique is there. It's not a problem of technique. We have the solar power, we have wind power, we have all kinds of other solutions, heat pumps, and so on and so on. It's more a matter of getting ourselves organized, but at first, believe that it's a crisis. And I would say, look around in the world, 1.1 degree, and you have already all those fires, floods, and so on and so on. We're still heading at this moment for 2 to 3 degrees. And that's not a funny world. And my children are from this century, so they will live 2100. I don't want to leave that world to them. So Agenda is therefore 90% of the time working on solutions, and today I'm not going to talk about them, which I normally do. It's much nicer, then you don't get so depressed. But in the building the sector, we also have a separate entity that makes houses energy neutral. We use all kinds of heat pumps and all kinds of other solutions. We've been doing that for 10 years now. And we can do it in a way that people don't have higher costs. And I think it's important to make it simple for people and make it in a way that you don't have higher costs. And I know that it's possible. And I think in your world, you have many solutions that we need. And we need to speed up much quicker to do that in a way that it's energy neutral. So what do we need? We need other leaders that dare to step up and say, this is a crisis, we need to move, have some big hairy goals. So in 2030, we don't drive diesel cars anymore. We have solar panels on all roofs and so on and so on. We should really make the goals much stricter and higher than we have them today. We also need different economics, because at the moment, in the Netherlands, but I guess everywhere, we choose the solutions that are the cheapest, and then it's always put CO2 under the ground, under the North Sea. That's always the cheapest from every calculation they make, and I don't think that that's the best solution if we want to move quickly to 100% renewables. I think we need more court cases, unfortunately, but I think we also need companies to step up, set goals, make the goals. And I think companies are the better ones than governments to set goals and make the goals. Because so far, governments usually set goals and never make them. So I hope that you are amongst the group that are going to do this, and that if people say it's not possible within 10 years, blah, 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 look around and see all those occasions where people say something was impossible and it did happen. I think it can happen. It's not a matter of technique, it's a matter of organization and of feeling that it really needs to be done. And I hope that you are then amongst the crazy people who are going to fix it. Thank you.